Hi, Mighty Mommy here, and I'm ready to share some quick and dirty parenting tips with you that will help make your life as a parent a little bit easier and a lot more fun. I'm your host, Cheryl Butler. The death of a loved one, especially if it's unexpected, is difficult for adults, but for children, it's even more upsetting, especially if they've never experienced the loss of anyone close to them before. Mighty Mommy recently experienced this with her 8 kids for the first time when their grandfather passed away suddenly. It's important to remember that children understand and respond to death differently. No two children are alike, and depending on their ages, this topic must be broached with their individual developmental levels in mind. Mighty Mommy has 8 tips to help you explain death to your child, as well as ways to help them grieve at their own pace. Tip number 1. Explain death in age-appropriate terms. Children at different ages and developmental levels need different explanations of death. For instance, your toddler or preschool-age child, children of these young ages aren't yet able to understand the permanence of death. So if a pet, a family member, or a friend dies when a child is this young, they may ask when the dead person or the pet is going to come back. It's appropriate at this stage to continue to remind the child that the dead loved one is not coming back. Be gentle, but be honest. School age and tweens. School-age children are able to understand more abstract ideas and understand the permanence of death. You can give more details about death to children as they get older, and they may ask you for more specific questions. It's best to allow your school-age child to guide the conversation, answering questions when asked and only providing as much details as the child wants to hear. For example, my 8-year-old daughter couldn't understand how her grandfather was going to go to heaven if his body was going to be buried in a nearby cemetery. We shared a wonderful book with her called What's Heaven by Maria Shriver that explains death and heaven in a real but comforting way for young children. This little book will do so much to help a child begin to understand the enormity of death. The point of it is not to argue whether there is a heaven and whether everyone will go there, but to create a safe haven for children to ask questions and receive comfort. My daughter read this book at least a dozen times, and it really helped her understand better what was happening. Tip number 2. Be an open role model. How an adult responds when a loved one dies can have a major effect on the way children react to death. Sometimes adults close down and choose not to talk about death, figuring that it will help spare children of their pain and sadness. The reality is, however, that children are going to grieve anyway. If adults are willing to talk openly about death, it can really help children understand that grief is a natural feeling. Kids need adults in their life to confirm that it's okay to be sad and to cry, and that the hurt they feel right now won't last forever. Tip number 3. Encourage your child's questions. None of my 8 children have had any experience with death of a close loved one before, so they all had a lot of questions. As parents, we don't have all the answers, but we felt it was important to encourage them to ask questions or discuss what was ever on their mind regarding their grandfather's death. Our younger kids had questions about where their grandfather was now that he was dead, and our older kids questioned why their grandfather died so suddenly after being so healthy for his entire life. We answered their questions as openly as we could, and for those questions we didn't have answers to, we looked to other sources such as friends and family members that had experience with death to help us guide them. Tip number 4. Allow children a safe atmosphere to grieve. Create a safe and special atmosphere where your kids can share their thoughts, fears, and questions about their loved ones. If you're able to talk freely in front of them, age appropriateness taken into consideration, of course, this signals that your family is dealing with this together and that they're all included. This might include discussing funeral arrangements. For example, we asked our kids if they were comfortable being included in different parts of the service. Our 17-year-old son did one of the readings, and 3 of my younger kids brought up the gifts at their grandfather's church funeral. Younger children may not completely understand the ceremonial rites of a funeral, but being involved in some of the planning helps establish a sense of comfort and that life does go on even though someone they love has died. Tip number 5. Attending a viewing of the body, or called a wake. Most cultures have a wake or viewing of the body. This may seem very scary to kids who have never done anything like this before, but it can also be a positive experience. It provides an opportunity to say goodbye and helps children accept the reality of death. It shouldn't, however, be forced upon a child. My kids had never been to a wake, but had heard lots of stories from their friends who had gone to them before. They were all very curious, but also anxious as to what their grandfather would look like laying in a coffin. Thankfully, when they attended the wake, they all had a few moments to spend alone with their grandfather, and were all pleased at how peaceful he looked. My 8-year-old daughter even wanted to touch her grandfather's hand, and even blew him a kiss at the end. She is still talking about how Grandpa's hand was cold, but it provided a bit of closure for her. Tip number 6, make a goodbye card or another tribute. Most of my children either wrote a letter or made a card for their grandfather that they placed in the coffin with him. They took some quiet time alone after they had learned that he died, and wrote out a few special memories of times that they had spent with him. I overheard them laughing and sharing stories with one another as they did this. The older kids really helped their younger siblings by reminding them of some of the fun things that Grandpa had done with them when they were little. Not only did creating these tribute letters and cards help them feel a little bit better, but also their grandmother was very touched by their gesture, and it made her feel comforted too. Tip number 7, let your child have a special keepsake. Having a special possession that belonged to a loved one who has passed on can be very comforting to a child. My kid's grandfather loved to play baseball and football, and he had a great collection of sports memorabilia. He also was a talented artist with many beautiful sketches and drawings hanging around the home. Shortly after his death, their grandmother invited them to look through his sports scrapbooks and his portfolio of drawings. They all picked one thing that they wanted to keep of his, which they will now treasure in a sacred place in their own bedrooms. And tip number 8, be a good listener. Sometimes kids just want to talk and know that someone they love is listening. At the time of a loved one's death, there are sure to be many overwhelming feelings and experiences as the funeral preparations are carried out and the grieving process takes place. If your child is having a hard time accepting death, let him know that you are there for him and are willing to listen to his thoughts or answer his questions no matter what. Has your family experienced the death of a loved one? How did you help your child with the grieving process? Share your thoughts in the comments section at quickanddirtytips.com/mighty-mommy or post your ideas on the Mighty Mommy Facebook page. You can also connect with me on Twitter at Mighty Mommy or email me at quickanddirtytips.com. Visit my family-friendly boards at pinterest.com/mightymommyqdt. Death is never easy for anyone, so be sure and treat yourself and your children with extra TLC when a loved one dies. This way, you'll comfort one another through the grieving process. Enjoy your wonderful families, and until next time, happy parenting.